This story is called The Prophet's Words Pierce the Piece of Cotton, and it features Tufayl Ibn Amr RA. Tufayl Ibn Amr RA was the chief of the Daws tribe. He was a distinguished Arab known for his virtues and good works. He fed the hungry, comforted those in distress, and granted asylum to those seeking refuge. One day, Tufayl left his village in Tihama in the south of the Arabian Peninsula and set out for Mecca. At that time, the struggle between the Prophet and the Quraysh was at its peak. The Quraysh resisted the Prophet's message in every way they could. They tried to keep people away from Islam by all means at their disposal. Tufayl was not aware of the struggle that was taking place. When the Quraysh leaders saw Tufayl in Mecca, they came up to him and gave him their heartiest welcome. Warning him about the Prophet, they said, "Tufayl, don't speak to this man or listen to anything he has to say. He has the speech of a wizard. It causes division between father and son, between brother and brother, and between husband and wife." Tufayl made up his mind not to approach this man nor to speak to him, and not to listen to anything he had to say. The following morning, Tufayl went to the sacred mosque and made tawaf of the Kaaba as an act of worship to the idols. He inserted a piece of cotton in each ear for fear that something of the speech of Muhammad might reach his ear. As soon as he entered the mosque, Tufayl saw the Prophet standing near the Kaaba. He was praying in a fashion that was different from the way the Arabs usually prayed. The scene captivated Tufayl, and he could not tear his eyes away. He felt drawn to the Prophet in spite of himself, and God willed that some of what the Prophet was saying reached his ears. Tufayl heard a speech that was so beautiful that he said to himself, "What are you doing, Tufayl? You are an accomplished poet yourself. You can distinguish between the good and the bad in poetry. What stops you from listening to what this man is saying? If what comes from him is good, accept it, and if it is bad, reject it." Tufayl anhu remained near the Kaaba until the Prophet left. Then he followed the Prophet up to his home. He went in, introduced himself, and narrated to the Prophet all the bad things that the Quraysh had said about him and the religion he taught. Then Tufayl asked the Prophet to tell him about his mission. The Prophet ﷺ recited to him Surah Al-Ikhlas and Surah Al-Falaq. Tufayl had never heard such beautiful words in his life before. Neither was a more noble man or just mission ever described to him. Without giving it a second thought, Tufayl stretched out his hand to the Prophet in allegiance and testified to the article of faith. Tufayl anhu stayed on for some time in Mecca to learn more about the teachings of Islam, and then returned to his people. He first invited his old father and wife to join Islam. Then they invited the Daws as a whole to become Muslims. But except for Abu Huraira anhu, they were slow in responding. He was the quickest to accept the invitation to join Islam. The next time Tufayl anhu went to Mecca, Abu Huraira anhu was with him. "What have you left behind?" the Prophet asked Tufayl. "Hearts with veils over them, obscuring the truth," replied Tufayl anhu. This time the Prophet ﷺ prayed for the Daws. "Oh Allah, guide the Daws, guide the Daws, guide the Daws." Then he turned to Tufayl anhu and said, "Go back to your people, befriend them, treat them gently, and invite them to Islam." Tufayl anhu remained in the land of Daws, inviting people to Islam until after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ to Medina. Then he returned to stay near the Prophet ﷺ. With him were 80 families who had become Muslims and were strong in their faith. The Prophet was pleased to see them.